In September 21, 1908, a boy was born in the heart of New Zealand's South Island in the quiet city of Christchurch. His name was Charles Upham. The world would later remember him as the only combat soldier ever awarded the Victoria Cross twice. But at the time, he was just a boy, curious, strong-willed, and fiercely independent. His father, a lawyer, provided structure and discipline. His mother, kind and observant, instilled a sense of fairness and justice. But young Charles was different from his peers. He wasn't interested in privilege or prestige. From a young age, he displayed a stubborn streak and a sense of responsibility that would shape his entire life. At school, he earned the nickname Pug, not for the shape of his face, but for his iron jaw and fearless nature. He had a temper, but it was a temper that defended the weak. Bullies quickly learned that Charles Upham would not let injustice go unanswered. He fought, not for himself, but for others. After school, Charles enrolled in agricultural college, but books alone could not satisfy him. He needed the land. The work of farming, he discovered, demanded the same qualities that would later define him on the battlefield: endurance, precision, courage, and unyielding determination. From 1930 onward, Upham worked the high country stations of Canterbury. The terrain was rugged, the weather harsh, the work relentless. It was here that he honed his muscles and mind, learning to think under pressure, to act decisively, and to respect the unforgiving forces of nature. He was no longer just Charles Upham. He was becoming a man capable of extraordinary feats. Little did he know, the world was about to change. In September 1939, a war erupted in Europe. Hitler's armies had invaded Poland. The world called, but Charles Upham didn't wait for summons or drafts. He had already decided. He would fight. In the autumn of 1939, Charles Upham didn't wait for a draft. He wrote a letter, one that would change the course of his life. He volunteered, not as an officer, not as a man seeking glory, but as a rifleman. He wanted to fight. He wanted to be in the thick of it. October 1939, Upham enlisted in the 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force, joining the 20th Battalion, Canterbury Regiment. He refused a commission, reasoning that officers took longer to deploy. He wanted immediacy. He wanted action. He left behind his family, his land, the life he had built with his own hands. Upham stepped onto the train, onto a path that would turn him into a legend. Training was rigorous. Every day tested endurance, discipline, and ingenuity. Upham was not the fastest runner, nor the strongest in brute force, but he was relentless. He absorbed every lesson, executed every drill perfectly, and quickly earned the respect of his peers. By December 1939, he was promoted to sergeant. His men followed him not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. Upham didn't shout orders, he led by example. Every action, every decision, every step he took showed his men that courage and strategy went hand in hand. February 1940, the New Zealand Division shipped out for Egypt. They were meant to garrison, to prepare, to train, but fate had other plans. The desert of North Africa would test every skill Upham had learned in the rugged hills of Canterbury. It would test not only his courage, but his very humanity. Here, the war was a different animal. Endless sands, scorching heat, ambushes in open terrain. Upham adapted quickly. He led patrols across the desert, taught men to move with precision, to conserve energy, to act decisively. Mutiny leader to soldier extraordinaire, this was the Upham. Within months, Upham was promoted to second lieutenant. He commanded a platoon, 15 men under his leadership. His style was simple: fairness, decisiveness, and personal accountability. He never asked of his men anything he would not do himself. The men under him began to notice something unusual. Upham did not just fight, he inspired. He didn't just survive, he planned, observed, and acted. His courage was contagious. The desert had forged him into a leader, one who could carry men through chaos with calm, measured bravery. It was here, in the endless sands and under the harsh sun, that Upham's reputation quietly began to grow. Senior officers took note, not because of ambition, but because in every exercise, every patrol, and every skirmish, Upham displayed the instincts of a soldier who was not just skilled, but exceptional. And yet, this was only the beginning. Upham was about to face battles that would push him to the limits of endurance, courage, and morality. Battles that would earn him recognition no soldier could dream of, and that the world would scarcely believe. March 1941, Charles Upham's 20th Battalion arrived in Greece. The German war machine was advancing fast. The British Commonwealth forces had been sent to defend the nation, but they arrived late. By the time Upham set foot on the foreign soil, chaos had already taken hold. Communications were fragmented, units were scattered, reinforcements had yet to arrive. The men were exhausted, having marched for days over difficult terrain. Upham understood the gravity immediately. The Germans had launched Operation Mercury, the first large-scale airborne invasion in history. Thousands of paratroopers descended from the sky at dawn. Gliders crashed, soldiers landed under heavy fire, and chaos erupted. Upham's platoon was ordered to retake Malaim Airfield, the strategic point controlling Crete. It was a suicide mission. The terrain was open, exposed, with German positions occupying the high ground. Machine guns swept the landscape with deadly precision. Men fell instantly. Almost immediately, Upham's platoon was pinned down. 3 separate machine gun nests blocked their advance. Most men would have hesitated. Most would have waited for artillery or reinforcements. Not Upham. One by one, he identified the enemy positions. Alone, he crawled across exposed ground under direct fire. Hand grenades in hand, he took the first position, rushing forward to finish off any survivors with his pistol. Then he repeated the feat 2 more times, each assault more dangerous than the last. The impossible became reality. His men, inspired by this extraordinary bravery, moved forward. They were no longer fighting out of duty. They were fighting because Upham led them with courage they could see, touch, and follow. By May 25th, the battalion was forced to retreat. The Germans were overwhelming in number and firepower, but Upham's leadership saved hundreds of lives. When another company became cut off, Upham, exhausted and wounded, ran 600 yards alone across enemy-held terrain to guide them to safety. Every step of the way, his men saw courage in action. Not theatrical, not flamboyant, but pure, calculated, selfless bravery. His priority was always clear: his men over himself. By late May 1941, Upham had already changed the course of the battle in Crete. He had been promoted to captain, awarded his first Victoria Cross, the highest honor for valor in the British Commonwealth. Yet Upham himself felt it was the men who deserved recognition, not him. In Crete, he had been shot, injured by shrapnel, and exposed to constant enemy fire. But he had acted decisively, saving lives, holding ground, and inspiring others. For Upham, heroism was not about medals. It was about doing what was necessary when everyone else counted on you. But the war was not over. Crete was just the prologue. Upham's courage, skill, and determination would be tested far more brutally in North Africa, where heat, sand, and relentless German and Italian forces would push him beyond human limits.
After Crete, Captain Charles Upham and his men were transferred to North Africa, where the war was fought not in dense forests or on islands, but across thousands of miles of scorching desert. The enemy, Rommel's Afrika Korps, a master tactician, ruthless and experienced. The stakes, total control of the Mediterranean supply routes. For Upham, the desert was a new battlefield. The heat was merciless, the terrain unforgiving. Sandstorms could blind a soldier as easily as enemy fire. But where others saw obstacles, Upham saw opportunity. July 14, 1942. Upham's company was deployed at Ruisat Ridge, a key defensive position. Intelligence reports indicated concentrated enemy armor and infantry nearby. The mission was simple in theory: hold the position and inflict maximum damage. In practice, it would be near suicidal. The German attacks came in waves, each wave stronger than the last. Tanks rolled forward, machine guns swept across the desert, and artillery tore craters into the earth. Upham's men were exhausted, but there was no retreat. Upham moved like a force of nature. He didn't hide, he didn't cower, he hunted. Alone he advanced toward enemy positions, throwing grenades, firing his pistol, even using captured weapons when necessary. One moment he was dodging a tank's fire, the next he was leading a counterattack that repelled an entire platoon. At one point, Upham's company was nearly encircled. German tanks were flanking from both sides, supplies were low, communications had failed. Most men would have panicked. Upham did the impossible. He reorganized scattered units under blistering fire, led a series of daring counterattacks, and held the line. During one assault, he charged a German tank position armed only with hand grenades. The enemy's 88mm gun should have ended him instantly, yet he destroyed the tank, then rallied his men to press forward. Wounds, shrapnel tore into his arm, his shoulder, even his face. Did he retreat? Never.
3 days later, on July 15, 1942, Upham's unit was part of a larger coordinated attack against German positions on Ruisat Ridge. Darkness fell, confusion reigned, units were lost in the chaos, separated from their comrades. And yet, Upham thrived in the chaos. Command fell to Upham when senior officers were killed. Alone, he moved through enemy fire, rallying men, redistributing ammunition, repositioning the wounded, and directing counterattacks. He became the living embodiment of discipline under fire. By the end of the day, his actions had saved dozens of lives and held a strategic position against overwhelming odds. His men described him as having superhuman courage, an almost magnetic authority that drew them forward even when death seemed inevitable. For these actions at Ruisat Ridge and subsequent engagements, Upham would be awarded the Second Victoria Cross. He became the only combat soldier in the 20th century to receive 2 VCs. Doctors, medical officers, and others had received 2, but Upham's was earned in the crucible of frontline combat, facing enemies head-on, time and again. Yet Upham remained humble. He refused to glorify himself, insisted that it was the men around him who deserved the medals, and consistently risked life and limb to save others before himself. North Africa forged Upham.
The desert battles transformed him from a brave officer into a legendary warrior, a soldier whose courage would inspire countless others. The story of Crete had proven his mettle. The story of Ruwaysat Ridge cemented it. But the war was far from over. Upham's extraordinary courage would be tested in ways no battlefield could prepare him for: captivity, relentless escape attempts, and the harsh reality of being a prisoner of war.
In September 1942, after months of relentless combat in North Africa, Charles Upham was wounded during an assault on a German position. His injuries were serious but not fatal. Shrapnel tore into his arm and his leg was bruised. He was evacuated to a field hospital in Greece, then transferred to Italy for treatment. But fate had other plans. In September 1943, the Italian armistice was announced. Chaos swept through military hospitals. German forces swiftly moved to capture Allied soldiers who were temporarily unguarded. Upham was caught in this sweep, and suddenly the soldier who had faced Rommel's best now faced another enemy: captivity. He was placed in Campo PG-47, a POW camp in Italy. Most men would have accepted their fate. Most would have waited for liberation. Not Charles Upham. For him, captivity was simply another battlefield. The camp was heavily guarded. Guards patrolled constantly. Escape attempts were punished brutally. And yet, Upham immediately began observing, planning, and testing weaknesses. He studied guard routines, structural weaknesses, even the habits of his fellow prisoners. He made his first attempt within weeks of arrival, a distraction during roll call, a daring dash across the yard. He was caught within moments. Punished, yes, but not broken. Upham's spirit remained unyielding. Methods were not brute force alone. Upham used cunning, patience, and psychological insight. He once discovered that the plaster ceilings of the barracks could be breached. Standing on his bed, he tried punching through the ceiling. The second layer, wired and reinforced, foiled him. He was caught, but again he was untamed, unafraid. In September 1943, while being transported to Germany, Upham saw his chance. A sharp turn in the truck slowed the vehicle. Without hesitation, he jumped and ran 400 yards, despite the risk of being shot. He was recaptured, having broken his ankle in the process, but his audacity left an impression. By October 1943, Upham was transferred to Oflag 4C, Colditz Castle, the escape-proof fortress reserved for the most dangerous and incorrigible Allied officers. Medieval walls, sheer cliffs, double barbed wire fences, the castle was designed to break men. But Upham did not break. He studied every detail, planning escape attempts meticulously. For months he attempted to breach walls, tunnel under fences, and exploit structural weaknesses. Every failed attempt added to his knowledge. Every punishment hardened his resolve.
In broad daylight, he once charged a double fence of barbed wire. Entangled, a German guard leveled a pistol at his head. Calmly, Upham lit a cigarette, smoke curling around the gun barrel. The guard hesitated. This was not arrogance. This was the power of reputation and sheer will. Over the next 2 years, Upham's defiance became legendary. Other prisoners watched, inspired. Guards grew wary, often overestimating his capabilities, which Upham sometimes used to his advantage. Even in the darkest hours, he refused to submit mentally.
Despite captivity, Upham continued physical training, military drills, and mental exercises. He maintained discipline not just for himself, but for those around him. He became a symbol of resistance within Colditz, a reminder that the human spirit could not be caged. For his persistent escape attempts, Upham was formally recognized, a rare honor for a prisoner. This was not for valor in battle, but for courage, ingenuity, and unbroken determination. Even without weapons, he continued to fight the war in spirit. April 16, 1945. The Allied forces were closing in from the west. Colditz Castle was finally liberated. Upham, after 2 years and 8 months as a prisoner, emerged unbroken, undefeated, and undefeated in spirit. He immediately asked when he could return to active service, a soldier eager to rejoin the fight even after years of captivity. The answer: the war was nearly over. His battlefield was done, but his story of courage, resilience, and defiance had already been written into history. Upon returning to England, Upham was reunited with Molly McTamney, his fiancée before the war. They married quietly, a personal victory after years of global chaos.
The war in Europe had ended. The guns were silent. Cities were rubble, armies had surrendered, and soldiers were returning home. For Captain Charles Hazlitt Upham, the story was not yet finished. On June 11, 1945, King George VI requested Upham's presence. The soldier who had faced the deserts of North Africa, the cliffs of Crete, and Colditz Castle itself, now stood in the grandeur of Buckingham Palace. The king pinned the Victoria Cross to Upham's uniform. For most men, this would have been the pinnacle of glory, the moment a lifetime of bravery was recognized. For Upham, it was merely a formality. Humble, unassuming, he accepted it quietly. Just a few months later, the London Gazette announced something unprecedented. Charles Upham had been awarded a bar to his Victoria Cross, a second award, a distinction only 3 men in the history of the British military had ever received, and the only combat soldier ever. The honor reflected extraordinary valor in combat. Crete, Maleme, Ruwaysat Ridge, and countless other actions where Upham repeatedly risked life and limb to save his men and defeat the enemy. Despite the accolades, Upham did not seek fame or fortune. Newspapers called him a hero, people cheered, yet he was still the man who valued duty over glory. When asked about his medals, he deflected praise, insisting that others deserved it more. In September 1945, Upham finally returned home to New Zealand. After 6 years of war, captivity, and fighting, he returned to Christchurch, to the land he had left behind. But the war had changed him. The farm he once knew required rebuilding, dedication, and patience, qualities Upham had honed in combat.
The people of Christchurch had collected nearly £10,000 to buy him a farm, an enormous sum in 1945. But Upham refused the gift, believing that the sacrifices of his comrades outweighed any personal reward. Instead, he used the money to create a scholarship fund for the sons of servicemen, ensuring the next generation would benefit from education and opportunity. Upham settled on a derelict farm, a place nobody else wanted. He found purpose in the land, proving himself once again against harsh conditions and the demands of hard work. Sheep, crops, and the slow rhythm of rural life became his new battlefield, one of patience, endurance, and quiet determination. Though he had fought across continents and faced death countless times, Upham's life as a farmer reflected the same discipline, courage, and integrity that had defined him in war. He engaged in veterans' affairs, quietly helping others without seeking recognition. Charles Upham died in 1994, aged 86. A statue in Amberley, near his farm, now commemorates the greatest combat soldier of the Second World War. Yet those who knew him said the man remained humble, uncomfortable with praise, insisting he had simply done what was required. Upham's story is not just of war, medals, and heroism. It is the story of a man who acted out of conscience, who protected others at great personal risk, who refused to compromise integrity for recognition, and who never stopped fighting, whether in battle or captivity. He was called a madman, a hero, a soldier, a leader. Yet he was simply Charles Upham, a man guided by principle, courage, and relentless determination.